There come moments in societies when the foundations of power begin to move. When that happens, things become shifty. Those are the carefully chosen words by filmmaker Adam Curtis, whose work often examines life now through history. SHIFTY is his new 5-part series for the BBC that recounts living in Britain at the end of the 20th century. It's honestly a harrowing watch. It starts at the end of the 70s and flows through the Thatcher years, through industrial collapse, financial ruin, and into the years after. I want to take a look today at SHIFTY's message and how watching a collection of clips from 45 years ago can make you think about life now. I'm not planning to spoil anything here, although given that it is a show that looks back at the last 45 years and the real events in history, there shouldn't really be any surprises. Although I do want to talk about my perspective as someone who didn't live through the 80s and whose life, which began in the early 90s, was shaped by the events of the film. And although not a surprise, what you see in the film did make me think about how everything is connected and has led me to be sitting in this room right now recording a video for YouTube. Adam Curtis recently said that YouTube is the last Wild West of the internet, so let's get wild. I first heard about Adam Curtis through Charlie Brooker, who would invite Curtis to make mini documentaries for Charlie Brooker's Screenwipe series.
Everyone knows that television news can be boring. That's because it's often about politics, which can be very dull.
But Curtis had been making docs long before this and has cultivated a style that really unsettles you. Typically, Curtis narrates the documentaries by himself, in a sort of David Attenborough style. His voice is his own, he doesn't impersonate anyone, but the cadence and the delivery are very reminiscent of Attenborough's nature documentaries. It reinforces the factual feel of Curtis's docs. It's as if we're observing history the same way that Attenborough observes the animal kingdom. But interestingly, SHIFTY doesn't use voiceover. Instead, it uses text on screen to deliver the context for what we're seeing. I think this is a super interesting choice that slightly alludes to this day and age. You can't passively watch SHIFTY. If you're not looking at the screen, you will miss the information that links everything together. And in an age where a lot of people have something on the TV whilst they're looking at their phone, I think this is quite a powerful move to force someone to pay attention. What we see in an Adam Curtis doc is like a TikTok feed of history, and he describes this as the way that humans think and interact. So when you see something, you might think, oh, that's just like this other thing, and remember when this happened? And that jumping around is actually closer to how we speak in conversation. Curtis refers to the clips he uses as high-end pretentious meta-tosh and is obsessed with the notion of the remix, something he brings up in SHIFTY. In the 80s, when synthesizers advanced, bands like Frankie Goes to Hollywood started remixing their own work in old music, and this was a huge source of inspiration for Curtis. He feels that a lot of culture and society are a remix, and so that's why his work takes this form, and he really digs into this ideology in SHIFTY. The main focus of SHIFTY, as stated at the start of each episode, is the shift in power. The series starts in 1978 with Margaret Thatcher campaigning to win the general election, and she's behind in the polls until she makes a speech about immigration and excluding immigrants from Britain. Something that was relatively new to discussion then, but of course nowadays we see in almost every political campaign. And it's insane that after 45 years of progression, that same argument still gets people to vote. She wins the general election, and this is the catalyst for everything that follows. And we're shown through archive clips that Thatcher positions industrial growth as a focus for the Conservatives. But when things go in the other direction, and Thatcher in fact drives Britain into its industrial death, we see that it's nostalgia that she falls back upon to justify her decision-making and as her compass moving forward. We're shown that she would refer to Churchill in 1940 over and over when times got tough. as if she felt that she was handling the same type of crisis as World War II. The fascinating thing is that there's a 40-odd year gap between World War II and Thatcher, and a 40-odd year gap between Thatcher and now, as if a 40-year gap is the optimal nostalgia. There is a nostalgia now for life in the 80s and 90s, before the internet and before the modern problems that we have. This nostalgia is present in culture and politics, with music sampling sounds from decades past, movies from the 80s and 90s being remade or rebooted, and political campaigns centering on returning to a better time. With this framing, we're invited to watch these events with the knowledge that we have now. We're watching the dreams of politicians, knowing how in fact they turned out, and knowing that our politicians presently tout the same ideologies. Curtis sees Thatcher as the last politician to have a dream of the future, even though we know that her original plan for the future didn't actually come to fruition. But he points out that how in prime ministers and governments after her, no big promises of the future have been made. In fact, Labour had such little vision of the future that they built the Millennium Dome without knowing what was going into it. And the breakdown of what it was supposed to be and what it actually delivered is representative of society being unable to dream of a future. Politicians now are scared to make promises in case they can't keep them, which means people who do make grandiose, sweeping promises to the public end up becoming politicians. Curtis makes a strong point about how Liberals turned from politics to art. The intellectual pool of Britons became disillusioned with politics, and instead, Liberals channeled their opinions into artwork. In the first instalment of Shifty, it's revealed that a Bucks Fizz song, The Land of Make-Believe, was written as a direct attack on Margaret Thatcher. But Curtis also reveals that the songwriter moved to Spain shortly after the release of the song and lives there as a tax exile. There's no clear hero and villain here, and that reminds me so much of the present day. Every YouTuber eventually makes an apology video, although I hope I never have to. Politicians eventually have to apologise for their actions. Influencers have to apologise for injecting themselves with stuff that they said they didn't use. A large part of the problem in our age is the rise of individualism. It's something that was encouraged throughout the 80s and 90s. And again, I've never lived in a world where you haven't been encouraged to be individual. Over the film, we see people begin to drift off from their class, from their community, from the popular, and into subcultures. It begins with identifying as punk or a mod or a skinhead, but then it's about not having a label at all and being completely unique. In a later episode, a student talks about how she doesn't want to vote because she feels that another person cannot ever represent her values and ideals because we're all so unique that we don't even have the same needs. And that was honestly devastating to hear. And I understand that you can be disillusioned with the politics that are happening around you. But to firmly believe that someone can never represent you in any way, that you don't share any needs with the people of your class or your town or the immediate community that you're part of, is kind of insane. It pointed out how far we steered away from community. And watching it now, I felt like this is actually one of the only elements of the past that could be beneficial to us now. Sharing your lawn more, going over and talking to a neighbour about what's happening in your life, bringing them a piece of birthday cake from a party that you went to, and knowing that wherever you are in town, there's going to be a friendly face who's looking out for you, are all very nice things that we should never have let go of. Being part of a community is really important because it can tackle all of the issues that we have right now, like poor mental health, like poverty, like feeling like you have to buy all these individual things for your household, when actually as a community we could share and nobody would have to feel left out. We're much more separated now, and a lot of the community that has been established in the modern world is online. It centres around fandom of a celebrity or extreme libertarianism. And it just encourages buying, because you have to buy the t-shirt to support the band you like, and you have to wear your influences on your sleeve. Curtis also highlights the democratisation of luxury in the last 40 years and takes us through the shift of money's value. There's a scene where a mum is saying goodnight to her son, and the presenter of the show says to her, "This doesn't look like a child's bedroom." And the camera pans round, and it is an empty room with a bed in it. And that's because 40 odd years ago, if you couldn't afford to buy something, then you couldn't buy it. But with the introduction of finance and no cap on interest, you can now buy items without having money. But as the film points out, if you could afford the item in the first place, then you would pay the original price. If you can't afford the item and you take out a finance plan, you could end up paying 3 times the actual value of the item, keeping you trapped in the poverty cycle. In another segment, a couple talk about how their home has become worth less than the mortgage they took out on it. And there's a really powerful thread in the series that a lot of people have commented on in interviews with Adam Curtis. He shows the growth of drug use, not through statistics, but in footage of massive raves and in interviews with people using. The footage seems to show people so disillusioned with life that drugs are the only way they can feel a moment of happiness. Ozzy Osbourne is shown in an interview and he says something to the effect of, "Yeah, I get fucked up. What's wrong with getting fucked up? But there must be something wrong with the system if so many people have to get fucked up." And the position of the documentary is that when people felt powerless in the past, they would rise up together and do something about it. Now when people feel powerless, they don't seek to seize power. They seek to just feel not oppressed. Watching it is an experience. I feel like I have been looking at the world differently ever since. I've been wondering what it would have been like to live through and what people then would think of life now, because there are so many consequences from what's happened before. And as I said, I have lived my entire life in the aftermath of this shift in power. I have no idea what it was like before then. It left me with a sense of everything in my life being out of control in some sort of way. Of course, I have day-to-day choices and control of what I do, but it feels like the environment around me and everything else that's happened along the way has actually come down to a few choices. And it really made me reflect on how influenced my life is by power and the fact that I don't hold it. One thing that really stood out to me were the accents in the film. Obviously, over the years, you see clips from history, and in the back of your mind, you're processing that that's a really unique accent. But not until I watched 5 hours of uninterrupted historical clips did it really stand out to me the clear divide. There's an upper class accent.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
We don't know whether or not people actually pay taxes. We don't go into that.
I think it's been a pretty good day. First of all, we've got a wonderful candidate.
And then there's all the lower class regional accents.
Yeah.
We are paying £467 on a place that we do not live in.
And now we live in one room with my mother, and we're lucky, like that lady over there, that...
Now it's gone. It was a management buyout, and it's gone now.
People working in factories, the people living in poverty, taking drugs, on the street, they sound like they're from a place and from a location. Whereas the upper class is unplaceable. They all have a commonality in their sound and it's very distinct, but you couldn't say exactly where they're from. And the way that people behave on camera was different then too. Curtis has said in interviews that he believes that before 1998, people behaved naturally on camera, and for some reason after 1998, people became too aware. Interestingly, there were clips in SHIFTY where people were doing something, and I noticed that at the end of doing the task, they would sometimes look up at the camera in this sort of questionable way, as if they were looking to it to go, did I do it right? Did the camera get me? And there's a innocence to that. There's a clear marker that this person has never been on camera before, and they're looking directly down the lens because they don't know that's going to come across as fourth wall breaking. Whereas when you see people who are media trained or used to cameras being around, they tend not to look to the camera for approval or reassurance because they're aware that this is going to be edited and they can probably picture exactly what the camera can see. And the way people spoke in film back then was really different to how people speak now. I'm very aware, and I have a complex about my accent, but I'm very aware that the way I speak on camera is slightly a performance. It's so that it's not boring and you don't have to listen to me going and and all the riff-raff in between when I'm thinking. What you get is a really polished version, and because I do this over and over again, I've started to speak like a really polished person. That was a terrible time to stumble over my words. But anyway, I am currently making a documentary about accent because when I was growing up, you were disciplined and punished for having a broad Scots accent and using Scots language. So many of my teachers in school were English and had this upper class accent and were forcing everybody to sound like them. And when I say disciplined, my parents were of a generation where you would get slapped by a belt at school. But when I was at school, they had abolished that. Instead, the teacher would shout at you ballistically and often humiliate you in front of the class in order to correct your speech. And what I've observed is that there is an entire generation of people who have a very displaced, neutral sounding accent, and they've lost that sound that connects them with their roots and their community. It means that you can't just identify where someone comes from their accent, where you previously could. And I think for me, it was also strengthened by the fact that I wanted to work in media. I knew from a very young age that I wanted to make films and TV, and I would film myself in my bedroom, and when I presented, I would put on a received pronunciation accent, the way that I heard people talking on TV. And I think this all goes back to what I was talking about around community. You used to be able to identify the people around you who had shared experience. And that was slightly down to the fact that people didn't really leave their town. You existed in one quite small area for a very long time. The UK has the most amount of accents of any English-speaking country, even more than the US. Even though the US has a bigger population, Britain is much more dense and people have stayed in their places longer. And that used to make it easy for you to identify other people in your community and even other people in your class that had the same lifestyle and struggles that you did. Now that is being dissolved and it feels like everybody is this island on their own. You can't really identify who your people are. And a lot of us are finding our people, but they're really far away and we don't all live and share a space together. We just exist online, but that actively looks like sitting alone. And I think that's quite devastating. I think that in-person community is something that we really need right now. If you want to watch Shifty, all 5 episodes are available now on BBC iPlayer, but I've also seen them posted on YouTube, so you can probably find them right here. Let me know what your thoughts are. The series resonated with me deeply, and I find Adam Curtis's documentaries tend to have a really big impact on people, and I'd love to know what your thoughts are in the comments.